Our guest now is a botanical artist who's just completed a book on the plants of the Quran. Born in Sierra Leone, Sue Wickison trained as a scientific illustrator in the UK and now lives on Waiheke Island. She says her passion for the natural world and history was nurtured during expeditions with her amateur botanist father. Together they would locate, collect and identify botanical specimens. After becoming fascinated with the plants mentioned in Islam's holy book, she began an 8-year research collaboration with a Pakistani scientist to identify the specimens. The resulting book, Plants of the Quran, is about botany, history and culture and includes reference to many present-day consumables such as pomegranates, grapes, ginger and garlic, which sounds like all the good stuff to me. Sue, good morning.
Good morning, Catherine, and thank you for having me on. This is an amazing opportunity, and I'm normally the one listening to you, so thank you for being part of my studio and for making my brushes flow better.
Oh,
so
thank you. I love
exciting to be here.
I love hearing from artists, and there are a few around the place. And hopefully not jarring that brush too often.
No, it helps it flow. Thank you.
Listeners, you can see video and other images of Sue's book on our webpage, rnz.co.nz/9 to noon. Look, we'll get to the backstory because I just love it, but let's talk about what you do first of all and just explain how a specialised degree in scientific illustration is different from an arts qualification. Explain your expertise and how you've obtained it.
It was a 4-year honours degree in London at the Middlesex University, and while a lot of the initial year was common to a lot of arts courses, it was very much focused on identification of species, whether you're working with zoological specimens or medical or botanical. So you specialise into one of those certain areas. So it was focused on a science-based arts degree. So if it was zoological, then you went on and worked at London Zoo. If it was medical, you worked at Barts Hospital. Or if it's botanical, which is the route that I went down, then I went on to work at Kew Gardens. So arts, but with a bit of science background, a bit of knowledge in the specialisation that you were choosing. So microscope work. Very, very much more focused on attention to detail. So,
yes, if you want to be an impressionist, you probably won't take this path, right?
No, definitely not. No.
Although I can think of some impressionists who had their own very fascinating takes on things like the human physiology and biology. What just occurred to me is that one thinks straight away about accuracy in the sketching, but actually what else is needed with respect to colour, tone, depth, to truly replicate accurately a living thing?
That's where all your preliminary drawings come in, and the particularly with botanical, with any specimens, with any scientific specimens, it's dissection to understand the structure. It is taking very close colour notes. So you're finding about the nuances, the textures. You're pulling it apart. You're feeling it. You're getting to the absolute nitty gritty to really understand the plant or what you're working with, and making numerous colour notes. So working from living material is absolutely essential. You're not working from photographs, although they can be helpful, but it's essential to work from living material, and you get those finer nuances of change of colour gradation, and that's the exciting part of it as well, is to really capture the essence of whatever you're drawing, the plant or the living animal. So it's attention to detail and capturing as many details as you can in terms of getting to know the structure. So that's really important.
Traditionally, one thinks of watercolour often, and I don't know whether that's just an accident of time and place. When someone was sailing around the coast of this country, for example. But is there a particular medium that's prevalent?
Certainly with botanical work, yes. Watercolour is the traditional medium. I mean, I have tried oil and I've tried acrylic, and I feel like I'm painting with my elbows, so I've always come back to watercolour, and that's what I was trained in, and that's what I'm much more comfortable in. You can get a lot more detail with watercolour, so it is the traditional method, absolutely.
Now, where has this taken you work-wise then?
I've been lucky to travel, so starting with perhaps with the Solomon Islands, working at at Kew Gardens, so working in the herbarium, and you're working on flat dried specimens, and I mean they could be 100 years old, and you're combining modern day specimens with some that are that are very, very old and perhaps even collected by Captain Cook, and so you have to create the perfect specimen from a whole series of flat dried specimens and make them into three-dimensional. And so the botanists would always go to these most amazing places, into the Amazon, and I'd say, well, why can't the artist travel and see the living material? And so that's when you can really understand better. As I was saying, working from living material as opposed to flat specimens. And so I was lucky to be given a project which was collecting orchids of the Solomon Islands, and then to be awarded a Winston Churchill Fellowship to travel there. So that was just an astonishing beginning of my career with Kew, and going to the Solomon Islands to collect orchids there and up into the bush and based in really remote areas, and finding specimens, pressing them, collecting living material. So it was all taken back to Kew, and it's actually still in the Kew collections there now.
One thinks of abundance, that's for sure. So Solomon's, Nepal.
So Nepal was fascinating in that I was working on a project there for slope stabilisation, so identification of species, obviously with particular root systems that literally held the earth together. So you're working on illustrations to help people identify which were the best plants to plant in the area to help for minimising erosion and as I said, stabilisation as well. Then also another area was into southern Africa, into Lesotho, into a very remote area there. Can I tell you the story about this tiny little water lily?
Please.
Right, so again, travelling to the most beautiful country, up at 3,000 metres, and in these limestone rock pools were tiny, tiny little water lilies. It's one of the smallest in the world, sort of the size of your thumbnail. And I was recording it because I'm very interested in recording endangered species, particularly raising awareness about them and obviously for posterity. But with this tiny little water lily, it has a spiraled stem, and so the reason for the spiraled stem is because it can be almost half a metre. That obviously the water varies in height in the pools, and so while the flower stays on the surface, what I didn't realise initially when I collected it, I collected the leaves around the flower, and then I found out that actually what I'd collected was not the accurate leaves, and so I had to go back and look at the type, which the type specimen is what the original plant is named from. And I found out that, so going back into the herbarium, going back to see the original plant, that what I had collected, which was floating on the surface, was actually from a different plant. And so that's where, observation comes in. And so looking at the herbarium specimen. So I went back again to the rock pools to 3,000 metres and realised that the leaves were submerged. And so it was on a little tiny pseudobulb in the mud underneath the water. And so they were underneath the water, which was quite unusual for a water lily. And so being able to record it accurately and show all those details. And so, perhaps what you initially see isn't always accurate. So you have to delve deeper and have to, be very, very mindful of that, what you're recording is completely accurate. So that was fascinating, seeing these little spirals. And then there's tiny, tiny little water lily. And that's now gone into a collection in UK. But, so travelling to these most amazing places is a treat, is an honour to be able to go there.
It must be wonderful, though, to be so intimately connected to the smallest, most, amazing part of nature. We're so disconnected. And here you are observing at the most kind of meditational level, although you're analysing at the same time. There must be moments of sheer wonder.
Yes, of course there are. And you're saying sort of meditation, it is almost like that when you're working and you're in such a zone of concentration. And I was describing what I call dry brush work, which is working when you're working on an illustration and you're polishing it and you're almost holding your breath and you've got these tiny little pointillist strokes on the paper. You're almost just sort of teasing the paper or kissing the paper with little brush strokes, and that is sort of meditative, and very much holding your breath and sort of coming up for air and remembering to breathe when you're creating these pieces, definitely.
Are there some swears if the phone rings at a bad time? And can you fix any mistakes or start again?
No, you can fix mistakes, and I do have little videos on Instagram to show people where I have actually made mistakes. And I've always said, don't be scared to go backwards to come forwards again. If something's wrong, it's definitely wrong. And I have an example of a piece of work I was working on, and I thought it was finished, and actually showed somebody, and it was actually my daughter, and I said, what do you think? Because she's a very good critique. And she said, oh, no, Mum, you haven't finished that. And I thought I had. So I went back and looked at the plant again, and sure enough, and sort of 4 days later, much more polishing, and I did actually manage to improve it, and something that I thought was finished. So that wasn't quite a mistake, but it's something where it's always good to have another pair of eyes to analyse your work and critique your work and bring you up to speed on that. But yes, if you make a mistake, don't be scared to go backwards to come forwards again, because otherwise it'll always be a mistake, and you can correct things, definitely.
It's kind of a message for life in some ways, isn't it? Look, just so many different uses as well. As you said, you've made new discoveries, you've got all sorts of purposes for this, and you have discovered, you had a species named after you, I think, during that time on the Solomon Islands, yeah?
Yes, I was supposed to be there for 4 months, ended up being there for 2 years for various reasons. But yes, I did collect a number of new species, and one, Coelogyne susani, was named after me in recognition of the time there, the work, the illustration of the book, and just the sheer volume of work. And so that was a real honour to have that named after me, because in the Solomons it was going into remote areas, you're hitching a ride on a helicopter to go up with geological groups, or unfortunately particularly in logging areas, which was sort of bittersweet, because that was very sad to see the effects of logging. But then from my perspective, it was sweet, because these huge, beautiful, majestic trees would be horizontal rather than vertical, which was sad to see that. But then I was given access to plants that I wouldn't normally be able to get access to in the canopy. So that was where the sort of the bittersweet side of it came in. So able to collect a lot more. But yes, sad to see the trees come down.
Speaking of collections, I'm trying to think, what's the name for the stamp collectors? Someone help me. Philatelists.
Philatelists.
Yes. You've produced something like 50 natural history stamp designs for many countries.
Yes, mostly in the Pacific and also for New Zealand, and they do range not just botanical but all natural history topics. And so it was always a joke at home that, whatever was in the fridge, be careful, was it something that Mum was actually painting at the time, or was that lunch for the next day? So I did do a set of lizards, and I think the kids realised that lizards weren't for lunch, they were definitely for my specimens to be painted. So nudibranchs, the little sea slugs, fish, all sorts of things. So yes, it's been a fascinating journey, and particularly with stamps, you take for granted, not so much nowadays, but they're tiny little works of art that people create.
That's the one thing I miss about them, actually, not the hassle of them so
the lick and
much,
stick.
but just that lovely little record. How did you do the nudibranchs, by the way? They're often, underwater, of course.
Yes, they are. Well, I was a diver, and so diving to collect them, and I had a fish tank, and so dive and collect this was in the Solomon Islands, so diving to collect the little nudibranchs and bring them back into the fish tank and illustrate them again, obviously working from living material and seeing how they move, and they have the most beautiful colours and patterns, and so they were a very fun topic to put onto stamps. And then once I had finished, putting them back into the wild, and so make sure I didn't have them in the tank for too long, otherwise they they had to be in good condition to put back in the sea. So I didn't kill anything in the...
no nudibranchs were harmed.
No nudibranchs were harmed yes, no, not at all.
Sue Wickison is with us. We're talking about her latest book, Plants of the Quran. It's about botany, history and culture. You're listening to 9 to Noon, 21 minutes past 10. So what was the spark for this latest book? Was this when you were in Abu Dhabi? And, what was the sort of flow of events?
Yes, I was lucky to visit the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi, which is an incredible place. And what's different about this mosque is the botanical motifs all over the floors, over the columns, over the walls. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And so I was very keen to find out what were the plants, what did it mean? And there wasn't very much information about them. And so then that led me to, inquiring more, what are the plants in the Holy Quran? And so I contacted a colleague at Kew who I used to work with in legumes and said, is there a botanist I could get in touch with, particularly about the Middle East, because by this stage I was realising that there's hardly any work about the plants in the Holy Quran, so, who can I talk to? And I was put in touch with Dr. Shahina Ghazanfar, and so it was a real serendipitous meeting because what Ghulam didn't realise is that Shahina had been researching the plants of the Holy Quran for years and was looking for an artist to work with her. And I was researching the plants of the Holy Quran and wanting to illustrate them. And so we joined forces. So it's working with a Muslim botanist, senior botanist at Kew Gardens. So she's Northern Hemisphere, I'm Southern Hemisphere artist. So you're combining a scientist and an artist. And it's been an incredible journey, over a period of 8 years in collaboration with each other.
Literally a journey. Again, where has it taken you? Who have you met?
The journey has led me to the UAE, to the deserts around Sharjah, up into the mountains in Oman. That was just incredible. I've been there a number of times with amazing people. And what I found is that, you're going into areas where the plants grow as they've always been, grown for generations. So you're going back to heritage varieties. So it's, for example, one of the plants in the book are pomegranates or garlic. But it's not a case of, going to the supermarket and just picking up any garlic. I wanted to go and see how they were grown and see heritage. And so going back to the plants that, that are closest to what would have been around at the time of the Quran. So, working with the garlic growers up in the mountains and the pomegranate groves there, and seeing the filage system, which is a system of watering stone trenches that come down from the mountains, and they've been there for thousands of years, and seeing the cooperation between the villages of how they water the pomegranate groves, and so you've got cooperation of sharing water and everyone being allocated water. But what I found is that people were also fascinated with what I was doing, and there's always a sense of interest, obviously, of kindness, of enthusiasm, of generosity of spirit. And wherever I've been, people have been so generous in terms of helping. So that's been absolutely fantastic. So it's been a journey with a number of people. I sort of say, it's not just, yourself just working with the paintbrush, but it's also the other people that have been there to help as well.
And Shahina's investigations as well also explores the uses of these plants beyond food, correct? Medicinal, other practices.
Yes, absolutely. She goes into research that is quite new. So this is the first time in history, not that there's information about the plants in the Holy Quran, but the first time it's a collaboration where we've pulled together all the plants that are mentioned in the Quran, plus also some plants that are ambiguous, depending on the country that it's found in, or like cedar, for example, whether it's Ziziphus spina Christi, or whether it's the cedar of Lebanon. And a lot of people say, no, it's the Ziziphus. So where there's some ambiguity, we've shown both species. And so that's been interesting to show the variety. And also with things like figs, for example, I've shown varieties from different countries, so from Oman and from Palestine and from Syria, from Morocco. And so there are food plants, there are medicinal plants. There is also some species, and one in particular from the desert in Sharjah. I remember going to find this plant and seeing it in the desert, thinking, oh gosh, this is not going to be a very interesting plant to draw. It's just a series of little twigs on the ground. And it doesn't look, as a botanical illustrator, you're obviously looking for something that has shape or colour or interest or, something to get your teeth into. And until I got it under the microscope. And then I realised that, it had the most tiny little 1 millimetre flowers. And so I drew them at times 25 so people could see the structure and get a much better understanding of it. So sometimes what you first see isn't, you have to look more closely. And so there was also this fantastic colour change with the wings around the little seeds as they went over. So what I thought was initially a very boring little plant, I had to apologise afterwards and say, under the microscope, you're really interesting. So, dig deeper, delve and look more closely, and don't take things for granted. So, yes, that's a plate in the exhibition and in the book, and these little scrabbly twigs actually were way more interesting than I thought.
Fascinating that it's a tiny little flower, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Literally a wallflower, I guess, when you think about it that way. The other aspects of your research, however, were you yourself needing to consult text sometimes to fill in gaps or to know where to begin your journey?
Yes, I mean, I was obviously in, collaborating very closely with Shahina, and also working, particularly in Oman, with people taking me out to find the plants. And then the more you work on, the more familiar you become. But it's also looking back at other illustrations, scientific illustrations, when the plants were first illustrated, to see what people have done. And as I talked about the type specimen before, with the Lesotho plant, so that you can see, and that's the beauty of scientific illustration as opposed to photographs, because when you draw it, it's absolutely accurate. So you're getting the characteristics of the species, and there's that's then would help me when I was looking for a particular species to make sure I was narrowing it down, and then I would send sketches and drawings across to Shahina to make sure that I definitely did have the right plant, and I wasn't drawing something completely atypical. So yes, you're consulting other publications and obviously working very closely with the botanist.
That flowering, is it the desert shrub that you were describing earlier with the tiny flowers? Is that the one in the desert of Sharjah? Is that the one?
Yes, that's the desert in Sharjah, the holoxylon. So this tiny little insignificant little, yes, it has scale-like leaves, and that was another one, the salt cedar, which grows on the salt flats, and again has tiny little. It's one of the things. It was a contrast from very tiny, few millimetre plants, and the leaves are like little scales. And I was painting these little 1 millimetre scales, and had an Instagram, a little video, and I thought, oh, nobody will be interested in me painting these tiny little 1 millimetre scales. And amazingly, hundreds of people seem to tune in to just be mesmerised by painting 1 millimetre scale plants. So that was quite interesting, what people will watch.
They will these days, all sorts of things. But again, anything I think that calms the nervous system, anything that focuses the mind away from our troubles, people will watch on video. So 22 plants then, I think, in all. And that sounds like something you could have knocked off on a weekend. Like, how long does it take? How long does it take, especially to get ready for exhibition?
Yes, well, there are actually 30 plants we're showing in the exhibition, because there is this, obviously, some of the plants are, as I mentioned, there are 2 different species for one particular plant that's mentioned in the Holy Quran. So the 8 years was spread out. I mean, it wasn't 8 years continuously, but it was several journeys backwards and forwards to find the plants at different stages, different flowering stages. And one in particular was the date palm in Sharjah. And so I had to go back at different stages to see that. And I remember going back, or waiting for it to flower, and I kept missing it each year, and going back, and got the call to go out to the desert early morning before the sun was up, and seeing the plants and taking little specimens of the flowers, with the male and the female flowers. And people were sort of starting to get a little bit agitated, and I thought, why? So what I realised afterwards was that they didn't want the sun to come up, because as soon as the sun's out, it starts to heat the flowers up. The flowers open and they release the pollen. And so what they wanted to do was to retain the male and female, or the pollen from the male. And so they would then suddenly cover the flowers with paper bags. And so to maximise the mix of the male flower pollen with the females, to obviously maximise the date production. And so they were waiting for me to take the specimens that I needed, so they could cover the flowers with paper bags and retain the pollen rather than it blow away. So it wasn't a problem taking the specimens, but I did need to hurry up with that one. So yeah, that was interesting to see what happened.
Not all art, Some of these colours are so intense, the blues, and again, this comes back to the skill of the artist and being able to combine and work and work and work until it meets the vision, yeah?
Yes, I mean, it's certainly with the date palm itself, the dates. I mean, one of the things there is that you have to be careful. I mean, gosh, I'd never tasted dates until I went to the Middle East, and it's not the same as having it from a supermarket. And fresh dates, oh my goodness, they're absolutely delicious. But when you're painting them, you've got to be careful that you don't eat, the specimens that you're trying to paint.
Occupational hazard.
I know. Someone said to me, they see me working, they said, how long does it take you to dash that off? And, I was sort of 3 weeks into the painting by then, and I said, well, dashing something off is not what you would associate with botanical illustration, which is, meticulous and time-consuming. And the work takes hundreds of hours.
Yes.
I mean, some of these paintings are over a metre tall, and that was at the exhibition at Kew Gardens. People were surprised at the size of the paintings, because they're normally, A4 or A3, book size, whereas these are, 1.2 metres large. And so the scale of the work is much bigger. So that's why it's taken hundreds and hundreds of hours and going backwards and forwards over a couple of years to get all the details.
And was that new for you in a way, actually painting on that scale, given the professional work previously and the stamps? Not that I'm saying often smaller takes longer than bigger, right?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, going from one extreme to the other, when you're working at Kew, you're working to plate size, and you have to fill the plate, and working on stamps, obviously, although they are bigger than the stamp size itself. But yes, I mean, this is unusual. Well, not unusual. I mean, my work has been getting larger and larger, and what I'm moving on to next is even larger still. So we're moving in the direction of getting bigger paintings, yes.
Well, Kew must have been very satisfying. The exhibition, the book is out as well. What is next?
Just to mention on the Kew, it's been an incredible journey with the calibre of people that I've worked with and with the group of people. So it hasn't just been about me; it's been about an amazing group of people behind me who've helped as well. What is next is incredible butterfly and a silk moth, and it's for the Rothschild collection. And some plants with the Rothschild name in them. So these are paintings that are over 2 metres big. And that was a trip to the Natural History Museum in London. That was incredible, going in behind the scenes and seeing the Rothschild collection there of insects. So fascinating. And I'm painting on vellum and painting with tiny brushes and almost pointillist style to get the scales of the butterfly and of the moth, and amazing colour changes. So very exciting to be working on these now. But the exhibition at Kew is still there until the 17th of September, and really kind comments have been coming back about the exhibition. So it's been a fantastic journey with Kew.
What is vellum, please? Is it a kind of skin? Or kind of...
Vellum is a skin that's produced... Sorry, Mum, you're a vegetarian. I don't eat it, but it is a skin, and it's prepared in a way that hasn't changed. The Magna Carta was created on vellum, written on vellum, and in fact a lot of law documentation is still written on vellum, certainly in UK, and so it's an ancient craft that it's down to one place in UK that still makes it. So it's an unusual method or an unusual substrate to work on.
And just a random question from a listener: have you ever visited the fruit room at the Harem building at Topkapi Palace? I beg your pardon if I've pronounced that correctly, in Istanbul. It is tiled in exquisite detail, themed with fruit and a few leaf motifs.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's just
next on the bucket list.
Let's just put it on my bucket list. Thank you very much, listener. I would love to go there, so I will write that down and endeavour to get there. Thank you.
Sue, thanks very much. Sue Wickison, and the book is Plants of the Quran, and the exhibition, if you can make it, of course, is at Kew in the UK.